you playing it safe with your pension to try and reduce the risk you're taking? Now, most people think risk are recessions, market crashes, their pension going down by 20 or 25%, but that's not the real risk in reality. So in this video, I'm going to talk you through how actually reducing the risk in your pension in terms of making it safer can actually be the biggest risk to your overall financial plan. But before we get into it, my name's Ben, I'm a qualified financial planner, and my aim is to help as many people as possible gain more confidence and clarity around a long-term financial plan. So what is risk? I think most people see risk as, I don't want my pension to go down in value. And this is a completely normal and human response to money because money is very emotional. The problem is people do that because they think the value is going to keep going down. Now, I can sit here and say that if your pension goes from its current value to zero, then you've probably got bigger things to worry about than your pension and your money. But what is the real risk when it comes to your retirement, your pension, and long term planning? Now, the real risk is that your pension doesn't grow enough to be able to ensure that you've got sufficient in there to support your income in retirement. So, what we need to do is we need to separate two different types of risk: volatility risk and retirement risk. So, volatility risk is the bumps along the road. Now, clearly, your pension is invested, and depending on the level of equity, so the amount of risk you're taking in the pension, the amount that it fluctuates is obviously going to vary. But this is the volatility, and this is what people see as the risk. On the other hand, you've got retirement risk. And what I mean by this is what I was alluding to a minute ago around you not having sufficient income or your pension not being able to generate sufficient income at your specific retirement age to be able to afford your expenses. So on screen, I've got two different types of portfolios. One which is a more cautious portfolio and one which is a more growth oriented portfolio. Now, you can see by looking at the graph that they do vary quite a lot. And what I've illustrated here is each portfolio during the 2008-2009 crash. So you can see that over this period, the growth heavy or more growth oriented portfolio has dropped by a fair amount more than the more cautious portfolio. However, if we look at this over a longer time frame, which is on the next slide, this then shows you the performance of those two portfolios over the long term. Now, if you're kind of interested in personal finance, you probably would have seen things like this before and thought, yeah, Ben, okay, I understand that. The more equity-based portfolios are going to perform better. What I want to do next is actually put this into context around your longer term financial plan and show you the impact that both of these can have on the longer term financial plan for you, both now and going into retirement. So to do this, I'm going to do what I've done in a previous video, which is using back-tested historical market data to basically give you a percentage chance of success. So what I've got is a kind of very typical base level scenario of a 40-year-old who's got about £100,000 in their pension. They're saving about £600 a month towards their pension, and their income is 60,000. Now they're planning to retire around the age of 60, and when they get to that point, they want to be able to have sufficient assets or a pension pot to be able to support a lifestyle of £30,000 a year. And again, as we've done in the previous video, we're going to stress test this to ensure that there's sufficient success that that money can last to age 95. Now, as I mentioned in the previous video, when we're stress testing these as financial planners, we want to ensure that these financial plans have about a 90% success rate. So we're not aiming for 100% success because, quite frankly, as I've said before, that there are adjustments that can be made along the way if needs be. But 90% gets you to a point where 9 times out of 10, your plan's going to succeed. So let's first look at the more cautious portfolio and how that might perform. So you can see in this example that this only succeeds in 36% of the back-tested data. So what this is saying is that if at any point over the last 100 years you have retired, in 36 of those 100 years, your plan would have succeeded. In the remaining 64 of those 100 years, you would have had insufficient pension to be able to fund your lifestyle in retirement. Now, this 36% isn't because you have lost money in, your pension in the stock market because there's been volatility. It's simply because it hasn't grown enough because you've been too cautious with that money. So if we now instead look at the more growth-oriented portfolio, how does that perform? So you can see the difference this makes. This jumps from 36% to 100%. So basically what that's saying is that in this same example, in the back-tested data, that plan would have succeeded 100% of the time. Now, you might be sat there thinking, okay, well, that's great, but how has that happened? And that's purely because the growth-oriented portfolio over a long-term time horizon has massively outperformed the more cautious portfolio. So my point is, I suppose, you're going to see more ups and downs along the way. But if you're in your 40s, you're still a good 15, 20, 25 years away from being able to access your pension. So the rises and falls you're seeing in your pension in that interim period doesn't really matter. It's more about you being able to manage that and accept the fact that there are going to be those ups and downs. And if I sat there and said, you can take a lower risk, and see less ups and downs, but you're going to be able to only spend £18,000 in retirement. Or I could say, you can take a higher level of risk and you're going to see a lot more ups and downs in terms of the fluctuation, but it means you'll be able to spend £30,000 a year in retirement rather than £18,000. I'm pretty sure you would take it. So what I thought I'd do next is look at that more cautious portfolio and say, we've looked at that on the basis of that person contributing £600 a month towards their pension, and that gives us a 36% success rate. So how much extra, or how much would you need to contribute to your pension to get that 36% up to that 90% we're aiming for? So again, you can see here the massive impact this has. So to get that 36% up to 90%, those contributions have got to increase from £600 a month to £1,000 a month. So how do we then compare that to the higher growth portfolio? So if we're saying in the more cautious portfolio, to get that 90% success rate, you need to contribute £1,000 a month. How does that compare for the higher growth portfolio? So you can see here, the higher growth portfolio, you only need to contribute £275 a month. That's a £725 a month difference, which is huge, particularly over, as I said, a 15, 20, 25 year time horizon. And just to kind of really bring that home and compound that impact of that, I've taken an even higher growth portfolio, and in that position, you only need to contribute £115 a month. Now, clearly, this is all based on back-tested data, and there's no guarantees of this happening in the future. But I just wanted to show you the big impact that taking too much of a lower risk portfolio can actually have on your long-term financial plan. So the trade-off really is you accept the volatility now, or you have to contribute, as we've seen here, 3 or 4 more times than you would ordinarily have to. So really, risk is not having a bad year in a stock market or having a recession. The risk is getting into your 50s and 60s and realizing that you've not got sufficient money in your pension to be able to retire when you want to, with the income you want to. So now we've talked through the risk and how that impacts on your longer term financial plan. You're probably thinking, okay, well, how much do I actually need in my pension to be able to retire with, let's say, £2,000, £3,000, £4,000 a month? So what I would suggest is checking out this video next, which explains that in more detail. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed the video. Hope you got some value from it. If you did, please do subscribe because it would really mean a lot to me. And hopefully I'll see you in the next video.